Simon.
Thank you, Lara. I want to start with a story which one or two people here I know have heard before, but my apologies for that. Legend has it that the inventor of chess took his game to the emperor. This was in India or China, depending on the story that you've heard. And the emperor was so impressed that he said, "Name your prize." And the maker of chess, who was a mathematician, said, "Well, I would like the amount of rice you find on the 64th square of a chessboard if you get 1 on the first, 2 on the second, 4 on the third, etc." The king said, "That's fine. 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, these are small, I can manage with this." He sent away his accountants, though, and they came back after a while and said, "We've got to 32 squares, and it sounds like it's going to be a pile of rice about enough to fill 5 lorry loads." And he said, "Well, that's fine, but I need to know what it is for 64, because that's what the bet was." And they came back eventually later, and they said, "Well, look, it looks like it's going to be a pile of rice the size of Mount Everest." Now, the reason why I tell the story is that the underpinning what's happening in technology, whether it's Moore's law for transistors or Kreider's law for hard disks, is this doubling. And it's also interesting to note that we are approximately about halfway through the chessboard, if you sort of go back to the beginnings of this process. So we're about halfway through the chessboard. In other words, today we have an internet equivalent to the 5 lorry loads of rice, but we're heading towards an internet of the size of Mount Everest. Now, these trends are what make technology so exciting, but I don't think it's the technology sector that's important in this story. It's the technology using economy that is really going to make the difference here. Now, some of this has been talked about this morning when we talked about the size of the internet economy. The figures came from either Boston Consulting Group or from McKinsey. One thing they totally miss in those figures is the idea of people researching online and then purchasing the goods offline. If you factor that in, that almost doubles the size of the internet economy just overnight in many cases, or at least a key component of those calculations. Now, the internet economy is a story about SMEs and about and about big businesses. One of my favorite stories is a Copenhagen window cleaner who used to clean windows in some part of Copenhagen. And then he used Google Street View to be able to start offering quotes for the rest of Copenhagen, because he could count the number of windows. And then he took it one step further, and now he can give you a quote for anywhere in Denmark, but he outsources the work to somebody else, somewhere else in Denmark. Now, when BCG were calculating the size of the e-economy in studies that they did for us, they accompanied it with an index that they started calculating. You know, there have been lots of league tables of broadband adoption, and what they wanted to do was to take that, but also add in e-commerce use and just general use of the economy. Now, that led to a league table. Convenient for our hosts, Denmark comes out highest in the European Union. But what I was struck by was when this table was, this index, this league table was taken last week by a couple of academics in Cambridge University, and they produced this chart here. Now, what this is a chart of the position with the E-intensity index alongside government bond yields. So countries that are doing well on the internet are paying less for their government borrowings. Now, GDP tells a story. Now, that's a story about GDP, how much is being bought and sold. But I think if you really want to look to the future, you need to look at productivity, because that's the that's the way in the long run any economy stays competitive. Now, I think Europe's productivity prospects depend on how we embrace the second half of the chessboard. Now, the major byproducts of transistors and hard disks is data. Now, data was once thought of as the exhaust of what you might call the technological motor, but today we should think of it as the fuel. There's a whole new business discipline. Harry mentioned it very briefly in his speech. I think it came up this morning. Whether you call it data analytics, data mining, or big data, it's enabled by the power of today's technology. And that data can come from inside a company or inside a public sector agency. It can come from experimenting with your website online and seeing how users use it. Amazon are a classic example in this case, so is Google. From the public sector, making their information available to people, and any other sources of information that you can bring together in a mashup. When the academics have started looking at this, a Professor Brynjolfsson in MIT reckons that for the same level of investment in ICT in the workplace, those that use the data efficiently are 6% more productive than those that don't. McKinsey looked at the whole area of big data in June last year. They looked at, for example, the retail sector. Companies that are using data efficiently have a 60% higher operating margin. That means Walmart in many cases in the US. But if you think that a significant part of the productivity gap between the EU and the US is in the retail sector itself, then it matters what happens and the way that we use data there. Government can also benefit from using data more carefully. The German Federal Labour Agency saved 10 billion euros and, importantly, delivered better services as a result of implementing a big data approach to the matching of people looking for jobs and people that have got jobs that they want to be filled. Google is, of course, a big data company. And inside our company, one of the leaders of our search technology, Amit Singhal, who leads some of the thousands of engineers that work every day to improve Google search, he likes to say, when you understand data, what you have is information. So if data is the first part of the productivity revolution, information is the second. Now, McKinsey, in another study last year, calculated that knowledge workers spend 5 hours researching information each week. So if we can increase the velocity of information within the workplace, that will make a real difference. And that's where the cloud comes in, for technology users. Consider a company called Schultz & Friends. It's a German advertising agency. It's part of the creative industries, and it has employees working in different places. They adopted the cloud, and they reported improved knowledge management, much less time searching for information, and, interestingly for them, they're now able to collaborate directly with their clients, working simultaneously on projects together. If you average that out over Germany as a whole, in a study that Google commissioned about how people use our technology products in this space, we found a 19% productivity increase. Now, I'm really excited about that when you look at that from a European level, because one of the things that we know drives creativity is when you combine skills and you combine perspectives. Now, in the academic world, they just call that interdisciplinary, but it does make a difference. And I think the cloud offers us at the European level something really exciting, an ability to really bring together the European workforce. If you take things like machine translation, that's beginning to remove the barriers, the language barriers between people working in different offices, maybe of the same company or in companies collaborating with each other, then you begin to see a future where you have collaboration across borders. And I'd argue that there are bigger opportunities for us in Europe from combining the diverse perspectives of Europeans than there are of, for example, combining the diverse perspectives of New York City and San Francisco offices. So, in conclusion, there is a lot of excitement in the technology sector, but I think it's dwarfed by the opportunities in the technology-using economy. GDP is only part of the story, and the productivity gains are what we should really be focusing on in the long run. Data analytics and increasing the velocity of information. And that can happen in the public sector as well as in the private sector. And the signs are that embracing the internet makes a real difference. Look here, it gets you cheaper bond yields. So let's build together an internet-powered, sustainable economic recovery. And I think my question for the panelists and for the audience here is what does this do to our policy making if we start thinking of ourselves as not being policymakers for the technology sector, but policymakers for the technology-using economy? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon.